Hi, I'm Eve Palatine.
And I'm Carmenta Seriano. We are the Glib Girls.
Welcome to the Global Girls Talk Show.
Today's topic is a continuation of our discussion about lifelong learning.
Hey, Carmenta, how are you today?
Hi, Eve. Nice day to be inside, actually. Unless you're enjoying a sunny patio in Second Life, of course.
Haha, Carmenta, you are right. Today I thought it'd be fun if we talk about overcoming the unseen forces that stand in the way of true inspiration. I'm talking about creativity here. And of course, I'm referencing the book called Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull and Amy Wallace. This book is actually about how Pixar got started back in the day and the different management issues that they had. And, some ideas they had were great, others didn't work.
That book has been a great inspiration to a lot of people. What was your main takeaway from that book?
Well, that's a good question. In the vein of Pixar itself, the major animation studios, of course, they talk about all sorts. And one of the mentions is regarding whatever we do, we always will have some problems working, learning, teaching, creating, etc. And many of those problems they're hidden from our view, basically. And we have to work pretty hard to uncover any problems, even if doing so is making ourselves uncomfortable. And when we do come across problems, we have to sort of engage all of our energy to try and solve them.
When you talk about that, about encountering problems and becoming uncomfortable, it reminds me a lot of Vygotsky, where he talks about learning happening when you get out of your comfort zone. Maybe you're challenged by a new idea that is contrary to ideas you already had. It makes you uncomfortable, and learning happens in that place. We don't know what we don't know, though. So when we encounter a new concept or idea, we may have assumptions that we didn't even realize we had. And we encounter new information, and the situation makes us rethink a previously held idea. And then maybe we decide that what we thought before is right, and maybe we change our way of thinking, but it's all part of the growing and learning process. I remember years ago when I was teaching, discovering that students in science classes might maybe learn answers in class, be able to regurgitate back to the teacher exactly the answers that they knew the teacher wanted about particular things that happen in nature, but never really change their personal belief. And so getting to the point with a student where they're really examining their own personal theories about why and how things work and challenging them to change that's really hard to do. How do you do that? How do you lead another person through a learning experience which causes them not only to rethink long-held ideas, but to gain a new understanding and viewpoint about those ideas?
Oh, yes. And I think it was great you brought up Vygotsky, too, because I'm a fan of his because, all of his tenets that he comes up with regarding education in particular, and I've used them so many times, like zone of proximal development and things like that, where, we put students together that will help each other, basically. And this also makes me think of another point, though, by Ed Catmull in Pixar book. He says leaders or people in general, they can get so focused on their own success or the success of what they're doing, whether it's a company, a school, whatever, that they never really seem to develop any deep introspection about other things that may be problematic for them or where they're working. And I have to bring up self-reflection in this because it's something that in the last 4 or 5 years that I have to say really has helped me to realize some of these types of issues about problem solving and how I've managed to solve some problems successfully by that deep introspection.
That reminds me of the concept of adaptive leadership, too, though I think we should discuss that in more depth in a different episode. And the Xander's Art of Possibility book also has some ideas that parallel this concept of self-reflection.
Oh, you're right. That's a great book. And, we both read that practically at the same time, didn't we, years ago? So that one does stick very close to the top of my mind when I'm thinking about these things. But that's definitely a good idea for a future episode because I've also got a lot of leadership stories actually stemming from my doctorate program that I attended at USC. My doctorate is in education leadership, and there were some really amazing leadership books that we had to read through. Some of them were hard to get through, and other ones were just had some groundbreaking stuff in them. So I think it would be great for us to kind of expand upon that at a later time.
You know, it seems to me that these ideas about creativity also tie in a lot with Gardner, and I know you're really fond of Gardner. And it made me think also of Daniel Pink. Daniel Pink, in his book A Whole New Mind, suggested that in the past we've gone through different eras. We've gone through the Industrial Revolution and the Information Revolution, and that countries during those times prospered. And he suggested also that the next level involves creative thinking. And his subtitle to his book was Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the Future. And the idea was that you can outsource all sorts of things. Other people can answer the phone, other people can do things in other countries, but creativity, the dynamic process of coming up with ideas and solutions, that's the next frontier. And the people who can do that, those are the people who will be the leaders. That requires creativity and learners who are risk takers and are willing to challenge their own preconceived ideas about things. So then how do we as educators help lead students into becoming those kinds of learners? In overcoming unseen forces that stand in the way of inspiration, what stood out to you most as a learner and as an educator?
Well, that's another really good question, Carmen. And what stood out to me and what still stands out to me is that I personally don't want to lose sight of my own creativity that I have inside me that's just in my brain trying to scream to get out as I'm teaching these book-generated English lessons to my Turkish students who are learning from me. And this is kind of an unseen force in a way, talked about in Catmull's book again, because we're responsible for certain things being taught in our English classes, but they're presented in certain ways in the book, which some of these ways they're presented somewhat stifle the creative process for teachers. And I'm sure that the students kind of feel that way too. Some of us are learning to work around that and managing to add back in what I call is the necessary creativity, necessary in my opinion for sure, and other teachers that I work with, that creativity to help the students be less bored with some of the material, because it can get a little bit droll when they're having to learn so much vocabulary. It's really hard for them at times. I can understand how they must feel.
So then how do you think we define creativity or describe it? I mean, it's not just being artistic. There's an aspect of divergent thinking and being able to see other possibilities. What do you think if another teacher at your university wanted to know what creativity is in this context? What would you say?
Well, for me, that goes without saying. I mean, in education, it isn't all about art, music, dance, or theater, although I love those things, and I do try to incorporate some videos of those exact type of activities for the students' entertainment, sometimes to break up some of the monotony of, say, having to read 2 pages of black and white text in a class period. But I will mention that to me, creativity is something that's necessary for me in all endeavors, regardless of how unartsy they may seem at the time. For instance, in teaching, I have to find these novel ways to teach vocabulary. So instead of just trying to rote rehearse and do the usual, okay, answer these questions, I break out the Kahoots learning platform, which allows me to create an online quiz, and the students use their cell phones to respond. And it's kind of like a little contest, a little friendly competition there. And sometimes near the break time, I break out the Scrabble boards and try to keep them energized by seeing what they come up with on their own. These are just 2 really small, what I consider to be highly creative answers to some of the problems about keeping my students engaged in the lesson. So this is kind of what I try to do in my way of being creative, trying to teach English.
You know, as you were talking about it, it made me think of Bloom's taxonomy of learning and the higher levels of thinking, you know, analyzing, synthesizing, evaluating. You're right, creativity isn't just artsy, it involves these kinds of thinking. And it also made me think of Maslow at the higher levels of personal development, where he talked about self-actualization and self-transcendence. So that suggested to me a journey, that it takes us all of our lives, and we should never be done. Even if we've reached self-transcendence, the challenge is helping to lead other learners through this process of personal growth. And there's so many factors to consider. You really liked a lot to investigate motivation, and I've investigated it myself in the past. But what motivates one person? That might have an opposite effect on another person. So you have a classroom full of students, everybody's different, and you do something with the entire group, and perhaps you motivate some people, but maybe somebody in there loses their motivation because that particular thing that you chose to do affected them that way. So using techniques to motivate, like even simple techniques like rewards, might actually cause the opposite effect. So a creative approach to teaching has got to involve blending all the factors that are part of learning, and that takes time. I think collaborating with other educators is key to achieving this level of teaching.
You're right. I mean, I couldn't have survived in this new job that I have, teaching at this really majorly different university that I am now. And if I didn't have the collaboration with my comrades there, the different teachers who have been working there a while, they have understood all of these issues very well, I think. And many of them are not native speakers of English either. They're Turkish, but they've learned English so well that they're very proficient and great teachers, actually. And what they've also learned is how to deal with the book when it gets to the point where they know it's going to be an interest loser in some areas for the students. They've learned how to incorporate different techniques. We all have different ideas. And this all speaks to the ideas that these things are also important factors in creativity. Perhaps we can explore this a bit more too in future episodes as we go on with these ideas and challenges, especially about motivation. I want to get into that. And this way we can almost solve our own problems with keeping creativity at a high level in situ.
Mm-hmm. So next time, I'd also like to explore what kinds of problems might hinder inspiration and how you recognize them, and what strategies one might use to break through those problems and to experience freedom and success in unleashing our own inspiration and creativity.
Oh, that sounds really great. And I'm sure that we'll enjoy researching about this just a bit during the week. And when we get back together again, we can start talking about it and maybe have some new ideas as well.